Okay, in this video we are going to try to verify another hard trig identity. So this one, if you're not already pretty good at these, you don't want to mess with this at all, because this is actually really challenging. So let's take a look at it, and we'll see why it's challenging. So we have sine cubed minus cosine cubed over sine plus cosine is equal to, for some reason, cosecant squared minus cotangent minus 2 cosine squared all over 1 minus cotan squared. So this seems like it's impossible that that's even true, but it turns out that it is, and we're going to go through and verify it kind of a step at a time. To decide which side to work on first, I mean, they're both complicated. I think it will be much harder to turn the right-hand side into the left-hand side because I'd have to somehow get cubes, and I don't even know what I would do to make that happen. So I'm instead going to work on the left-hand side and turn it into the right-hand side because something jumps out at me immediately about the left-hand side, and that is that I have a difference of cubes in the numerator. So my first step here is to factor the difference of cubes. So sine minus cosine, and then sine squared, and then it's plus sine cosine, and plus cosine squared. And then that'll be over the original denominator. And now, I mean, I'm pretty committed, so I'm on this side. I'm going to take a look at the original right-hand side, and I see in the denominator there's, it's actually a difference of squares, and so there's a minus sign in the middle there. So I'd like to do something to this left-hand side that I'm working on to get a minus sign in the middle of the terms in the denominator. So I'm thinking I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom of this thing by sine minus cosine, which seems like it'll be helpful, so I'm going to try that. You also might notice there's already a sine minus cosine in the numerator of this, so that'll be interesting. So we get top and the bottom by sine minus cosine. And so what do we have left here? So there's still a sine minus cosine. And then before I write this second part of the numerator here, I want to look at, so I see sine squared plus cosine squared, and that's definitely 1. So I'm going to make that 1, and then plus sine cosine, because I want to get simpler as much as I can. And then this is over the original denominator still. So sine plus cosine. And let's see, so I'm not going to expand yet in the numerator, so I'm actually just going to write it as sine minus cosine and then that quantity squared, and then 1 plus sine cosine. I am going to expand in the denominator because that's kind of the whole idea, is that I wanted to get kind of a difference of squares here. So sine squared minus cosine squared, which I feel like I'm making progress. I mean, maybe it doesn't seem like I am. So now I'm going to look again at the original right-hand side, and in the denominator there, there's this 1. And so there's something I can do to get a 1 in the side I'm working on now, and that's if I multiply the top and the bottom by 1 over sine squared. So I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom of this fraction by 1 over sine squared. So here we go, 1 over sine squared, 1 over sine squared. So that's what I'm doing. And now in the numerator, this is actually maybe the trickiest thing that I'm going to do. So I have 1 over sine squared, and I also have the quantity sine minus cosine squared. So that's a thing squared divided by a thing squared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring both of them under one square, one set of parentheses squared. So that's going to be, it looks like it's the weirdest thing I'm going to do probably in this whole process. So I'm going to make it sine minus cosine all over sine, and then that quantity squared. So if you compare it to what I had in the previous step, you can see the 1 over sine squared is still there, the sine minus cosine quantity squared is still there. I just combine them, and then I still have my 1 plus sine x cosine x. And then in the denominator, something kind of interesting happens. I have sine squared over sine squared is just 1, and then minus cosine squared over sine squared is actually cotan squared. So I've actually got the denominator now. So that's kind of exciting because it means I just have to somehow get the numerator out of this. So I'm going to need to move to another page. So let me just copy this. So I have this, and then just for reference, what we're doing is we're trying to show that this is equal to this. That's the original right-hand side. So back to this left-hand side, I'm going to simplify the sine minus cosine all over sine. So inside those parentheses, I end up with just 1 minus cotan, and that's squared. I have 1 plus sine cosine, and then over 1 minus cotan squared. 1 minus cotan squared is done, so that's nice. I'm now just going to expand. So 1 minus cotan quantity squared. I'm going to expand that. So I get 1 minus 2 cotan plus cotan squared, and 1 plus sine cosine. So it's important to realize while you're watching this, I didn't really know this was going to work while I was doing it. I thought it would work. I didn't make any mistakes. Like, that's the key thing. Make sure you're not making mistakes as you go. And you should just keep getting equivalent expressions. Hopefully they're simplifying. In my case, this is working out. But if it hadn't, I would have just gone back to the start and tried something different. Okay, so I see in expanding this, I've gotten 1 and plus cotan squared. 1 plus cotan squared, that's a Pythagorean identity. That's cosecant squared. So this is getting simpler, cosecant squared minus 2 cotan, and then times this thing. This is a long identity. I'm actually going to need another page here. Alright, so I'm going to copy this to the next page, and then see what we can do. So at this point, there's nothing really to do except expand the numerator. So as I do that, I'm going to do it kind of intelligently, I guess, or, well, what might be intelligently. So cosecant squared times 1 is cosecant squared. Then I need to do cosecant squared times the second thing, so sine times cosine. But instead of using cosecant squared, I'm going to use 1 over sine squared because it helps me simplify kind of a little quicker. So it's plus sine times cosine. And I'm really multiplying by cosecant squared, but cosecant squared is 1 over sine squared. So I'm just going to do that. And then it's negative 2 cotan times 1, so that's just minus 2 cotan of x. And then again, I have to do negative 2 cotan times sine times cosine, but I'm going to change cotangent into cosine over sine, just because it'll speed things up. And this is already taking forever. So times sine times cosine, and then all this is over the denominator, which has been done for like 5 minutes. Okay, so simplify everything I see here. I'm going to get cosecant squared. One of the signs in the denominator cancels with the sign in the numerator. Cosine over sine is cotan. Minus 2 cotan, nothing happening there. The sine and the sine cancel, so this will be minus 2 cosine squared. And then all over our denominator. And there's one last thing to do here. This is kind of exciting because this is a really challenging identity. So I get cosecant squared minus cotan minus 2 cosine squared all over 1 minus cotan squared, which if you go back way far to the very beginning, you will see is actually the original right-hand side. So we did it. We turned the left-hand side into the right-hand side. We didn't break any rules. This is challenging. And so I'm going to emphatically say that we are done. Alright, so that's a pretty hard trig identity. I hope you found this helpful, and good luck.